Racist bullies mock black twins didn't know they're trained to fight back. The echo of mocking laughter filled the courtyard, and Jada could feel the heat rise in her chest. The words were sharp, biting, meant to cut deep. She had heard insults like this before, but this time, there was something different in the air. The words hung over her like a dark cloud, and she could feel every pair of eyes watching her and Janelle, waiting for a reaction. This was no longer just a question of belonging. This was a challenge. Ryan Mallory stood at the center of the crowd, leaning casually against the brick wall with a smug smirk stretched across his face. His friends Zach and Brent flanked him, eyes full of the same arrogant superiority that only came from people who had never faced the consequences of their actions. The trio had made it their mission to make Jada and Janelle's lives miserable ever since the first day they stepped foot into Rosewood Hills Academy. "You two really think you belong here?" Ryan sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone within earshot to hear. "Did you get lost on the way to the janitor's closet?" His friends laughed, the sound like nails scraping against metal, and Jada clenched her fists, the muscles in her arms tight with the effort to stay calm. Janelle, standing just beside her, didn't flinch either, her face a mask of cool indifference. They had trained for this. They knew how to handle bullies like Ryan, how to keep control in the face of cruelty. But today, it felt different. It felt like they were about to be pushed too far. "Keep walking," Jada muttered under her breath to Janelle, her voice steady, but her anger simmering beneath the surface. "We're not here for this." Without breaking stride, they moved forward, ignoring the snickers and whispers that followed them. But the words kept coming, relentless and biting. "You two are just here to fill the diversity quota, huh?" Zach added, his voice dripping with malice. "You think you can just waltz in here like you're entitled to a spot in our world?" Brent's voice was loud, mocking, meant to make a show of dominance. But still, Jada and Janelle walked on, shoulders squared, eyes set on the doors of the building ahead. They wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a response. Not yet. But the next shove came quickly, as if Ryan had planned it. He stepped into Jada's path, blocking her way, and she had no choice but to stop. Her breath caught in her chest for just a moment, a flash of frustration threatening to take hold, but she pushed it down. Ryan's grin widened as he leaned in closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Maybe we should teach you how to talk properly," he said, his words meant to sting. "In case you forget, this is our world, not yours." Jada's heart pounded, and her fingers tingled with the need to strike. But she stood still, breathing deeply, her mind focused on the lessons her father had drilled into her. He had taught her that anger wasn't something to act on rashly. He had taught her to wait, to control the moment before letting the fight take over. Ryan's smirk faltered for a moment, as if he sensed the shift in her stance, the tension that had settled in her body. But then, before he could make another move, Janelle spoke. "We're not here for this, Ryan," she said, her voice calm but filled with undeniable strength. "But if you keep pushing, you'll regret it." Ryan laughed, his arrogance flaring up again. "Oh, you think we'll regret this? You're out of your league, sweetheart." Without another word, he pushed past her, and the twins continued to walk, eyes forward. But the words didn't stop. The crowd had grown larger now, with more students gathering to watch the spectacle unfold. They were used to it by now, the whispers, the stares, the quiet but ever-present reminder that they were different. But they had been prepared for this. Their father, Derek Rivers, had always told them to expect challenges, to expect the world to test them in ways they couldn't imagine. He had trained them to stand tall, to fight when necessary, but more importantly, to never let the words of others define who they were. That night, after the long day at school, Derek noticed the changes in them before they even spoke a word. He could see it in the tension in their shoulders, the tightness in their jaws. Over dinner, He let the silence stretch between them before he spoke, his voice calm but filled with the weight of experience. "You're holding it in, aren't you?" he asked, his eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. Jada nodded, the fire of frustration still burning inside her, though she tried to keep it contained. "They won't stop, Dad. It's getting worse every day." Janelle's voice was quieter but just as firm. "We can't just keep ignoring it. What if they push us too far?" Derek didn't respond immediately. He simply watched them both, his expression steady, unreadable. Finally, after a long moment, he spoke again, his words soft but filled with authority. "You've been taught control, both of your bodies and your minds. But control is power, girls. Don't let them make you believe you're weak because you don't fight back immediately. Your strength is in your choices, in how you handle the situation, not in how loud you are or how fast you act." Jada swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over her like a quiet promise. "I know, Dad. But how much longer do we just take it?" Derek's eyes softened just for a moment, and he placed his hands on their shoulders, one at a time. "You've trained for this, both of you. But remember this, it's not about breaking first. It's about making sure they know who they're dealing with. The day will come when you'll have to stand up for yourselves. And when that day comes, you won't be the ones to break." Janelle nodded, her hands still clenched into fists, but her gaze was steadier now. "When the time comes, we'll be ready." The words settled over them like a weight and a shield. They had been prepared for this. The storm had been coming, and it wasn't over yet. But soon, they would be ready to face it. This chapter sets the stage for the twins' journey, showing their internal strength and discipline instilled by their father, Derek Rivers. As they face relentless bullying and mockery at their new school, they're forced to confront the thin line between enduring cruelty and standing up for themselves. Their father's lessons in patience and self-defense prepare them for the inevitable showdown with Ryan and his gang of bullies. The next morning, Jada and Janelle walked through the crowded hallways of Rosewood Hills Academy, their steps even, their heads held high. It was a ritual now, walking with purpose, ignoring the pointed stares, the whispers that always seemed to follow them. But today, the air felt thicker than usual. The tension in the halls was palpable, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Ryan Mallory was already in his usual spot near the lockers, leaning against the cold metal. His friends gathered around him like vultures ready to pounce. They all laughed too loudly, their voices cutting through the morning stillness, a cruel reminder of how quickly a place that once felt new and hopeful had turned into a battlefield. Zach and Brent flanked Ryan, each with their own brand of smugness, eyes trained on the twins as they walked past. "Look who it is!" Zach's voice rang out, too loud for comfort. "The princesses of the school walking into their royal court. How are you today, ladies?" Jada didn't break stride. Janelle's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond either. They had been here before, and they had learned how to keep moving forward, even when the world seemed intent on knocking them down. Ryan stepped forward, blocking their path. His smirk was the kind that said he knew exactly what he was doing, and enjoyed every second of it. "You two really think you belong here?" His voice was dripping with mockery, a challenge thrown at their feet. For a moment, Jada felt the weight of his gaze, the weight of every single eye that had turned to watch. The hallway, usually filled with the chatter of other students, seemed silent now, the anticipation thick in the air. It was like the entire school was waiting for them to react, but Jada knew better than to give them what they wanted. "Move," she said softly, her voice steady, a quiet threat hanging in the air. Ryan laughed, but it wasn't genuine. It was the laugh of someone who wasn't used to being told no, someone who thought his place in the world was unshakable. "What's the matter?" he sneered. You afraid of getting a little dirty? I think you've got it all wrong. You're the ones who don't belong here. This school was never made for people like you." Janelle shifted slightly beside her sister, but still neither twin flinched. "You're right about one thing," Jada said, her voice low and calm. "We don't belong here, but it's not because of who we are. It's because of people like you." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat, sharp and cutting. There was a flicker of something close to surprise in Ryan's eyes. But it was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the same arrogant grin. "I don't care who you are," he said, stepping closer, trying to push them back with his presence. "You're in my world now, and if you don't get that, you'll learn soon enough." Janelle's voice cut through the tension. "We've learned enough already," she said, her tone ice cold. "We've learned how to fight back. We've learned that you can't break us." Ryan took a step forward, his hands balling into fists at his sides. But before he could move any closer, the sound of a teacher's voice echoed down the hallway, halting the moment. "Ryan, enough!" Mr. Turner, a teacher they had barely interacted with, stepped into the scene, his eyes sharp. "Back off now! This isn't the place for this." Ryan scowled but didn't push further. He shot one last glare at the twins, his anger simmering just below the surface. "You're lucky the teacher showed up," he muttered, but the venom in his words was obvious. "This isn't over." "Of course it's not over," Jada said, her voice quiet but firm. "We'll see you again soon enough." The twins walked away, their shoulders squared, their heads held high. They didn't need to say anything more. They had made their point, and it was clear they weren't going to back down. As they reached their next class, the door closing behind them with a soft click, Janelle finally spoke. "This is getting worse. They won't stop." Jada nodded, her gaze focused ahead. "They think we'll break, but we're not going to. We'll make them regret it." But even as the words left her mouth, she could feel the unease creeping in. The tension that had been building in the air was undeniable. This was only the beginning, and Jada and Janelle knew it. They had been prepared for the bullies to test them, but they never expected it to escalate so quickly. The next few days were a blur of constant tension. The whispers grew louder, the stares more persistent. They were followed in the halls, bumped into on purpose, and always made to feel like they didn't belong. Teachers, too, had stopped offering the same attention. It was as if they were invisible, relegated to the outskirts of the social sphere. One afternoon, as they made their way to the gym for physical education class, Jada and Janelle found their lockers filled with crumpled papers. More insults, more slurs, more proof that Ryan and his gang were only just getting started. The words scrawled across the walls of their lockers were vile, but it wasn't the slurs that bothered them the most. It was the fact that, once again, no one stepped forward. No one said a word. Jada clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms. The anger was bubbling up again, and this time it felt like too much to hold inside. "Do you think they'll ever stop?" Janelle asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "They won't," Jada replied, her gaze flicking to the cruel words on the paper. "But it's okay. We don't need them to stop. We'll make them." Just then, as they were about to leave, a voice broke the silence. It was one of the quieter students, a girl who had often kept her distance from the chaos. "You don't have to fight alone," she said softly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can do much, but I won't stand by and let them do this to you." Jada and Janelle exchanged a brief glance. For a moment, they saw something in this girl, something they hadn't expected. There were others who felt the weight of what was happening, who knew that the cruelty they faced wasn't just about them. It was about something much larger. "We appreciate it," Jada said, her voice steady. "But we can't handle it." The girl nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Jada couldn't ignore. "Just remember, not everyone is like them." With that, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving the twins to face the challenge ahead. But this time, they didn't feel alone. The fight was still theirs to win, but now it wasn't just about proving they could stand up. It was about showing everyone that they were more than what Ryan and his friends wanted them to be. As they walked to the gym, side by side, Janelle's voice was quiet, but resolute. "We won't back down." Jada looked at her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Not ever." And with that, they stepped forward, ready for whatever came next. It was inevitable. Every moment, every glance, every whisper that had followed them since they stepped onto this campus was leading up to something, and Jada and Janelle knew it. The tension in the air was thick with unspoken words, like the storm that brews just before it breaks. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. They'd been preparing for this moment ever since their first day at Rosewood Hills Academy. The subtle taunts, the mocking laughter, the subtle yet cutting remarks, they were all building to a point, and they could feel it coming. The hallway felt unusually quiet as the twins made their way to their next class, their footsteps echoing louder than usual. Students moved aside, their eyes trained on the sisters as they passed. The whispers grew sharper, more urgent, but Jada and Janelle walked on, side by side, their faces calm and unreadable. They had learned long ago that when people want to see you break, the best response is silence. But this silence? This one felt different. It wasn't just the usual noise of a school filled with teenagers. This silence was pregnant with anticipation. Something was about to happen, and they knew exactly who was behind it. Ryan Mallory had been waiting for them. The moment they stepped through the door into the classroom, they could feel his presence, his eyes already locked on them. His gang of friends, Zach and Brent, were by his side, but it was Ryan's gaze that burned into them. It wasn't the usual sneer or taunt today. Today, it was a look that said he was ready for something more. He wasn't going to settle for words or insults anymore. "Hey!" Ryan's voice rang out, loud enough for everyone in the classroom to hear. The teacher hadn't even entered the room yet. "How's it going, ladies? Hope you're ready to get acquainted with the real Rosewood." Jada felt the heat rise in her chest, but she kept her cool. Her father's lessons echoed in her mind, steadying her. Control. Power. They wanted her to react. That's when you give them nothing. She looked ahead, pretending to ignore Ryan's words, but Janelle's grip on her backpack strap tightened, the tension between them as palpable as the air around them. Ryan didn't miss a beat. He took a step closer, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" His eyes flicked to his friends, who were already snickering, feeding off his energy like a pack of hyenas circling their prey. The whole class had gone quiet, watching, waiting, knowing this wasn't just some casual exchange anymore. It was a confrontation, and it was only a matter of time before it escalated. Janelle's voice, soft but firm, cut through the silence like a knife. "Don't waste our time, Ryan." That's all it took. A few simple words, delivered with the calm certainty they had practiced so many times before. And for a moment, Ryan faltered. He blinked, taken aback by the steady resolve in Janelle's voice. But that brief hesitation didn't last long. He was quick to recover, his smirk returning, though there was something darker in his eyes now. "You two really think you're special, don't you?" Ryan scoffed, leaning in just a little closer. "You're nothing more than some novelty, a sideshow for everyone to laugh at. You're not even supposed to be here." Jada's fingers tightened around her notebook. The words stung more than she'd expected, but she knew this was the moment that had been coming. Ryan had underestimated them. And now he was going to find out just how wrong he was. "Maybe you should watch your mouth, Ryan," Jada said, her voice low but her words sharp. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her gaze never wavering. "We've had enough of your crap." Ryan stepped back, surprised at the sudden shift in power, but his arrogance quickly returned. He laughed, trying to regain control. "You're really something, huh? Let's see how tough you are when you're alone in the parking lot." His words were meant to provoke, but they only made Jada's resolve harder. She could see it in his eyes. The fear that he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. He had spent too long hiding behind his privilege, and now that wall was beginning to crumble. But it wasn't just about Ryan anymore. As the bell rang and the class began, the tension between the twins and the rest of the school was palpable. The other students were starting to take sides. The whispers had turned into murmurs, and the murmurs into conversations. They were watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Lunch came, and with it, another round of subtle attacks. This time it wasn't just the words that hurt, it was the eyes, the stares. The sense that everyone was watching for the wrong reason. Jada and Janelle sat at their usual spot, trying to keep their heads down, but it was impossible to ignore the group of girls that gathered nearby, gossiping about them in low voices. "I heard they don't even belong here," one of them whispered, just loud enough for Janelle to hear. "Yeah, they probably think they're too good for the rest of us," another added, her voice sharp with jealousy. Janelle's fingers dug into her napkin, but she didn't respond. She wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She had learned that much from her father. If they wanted to throw stones, let them. She wouldn't be the one to break. But Jada couldn't sit in silence any longer. Her temper was close to snapping, and for a moment, she considered walking over to the group and confronting them face to face. But she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath and turned to her sister. "You know they're only testing us, right?" she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I know," Janelle replied, her gaze flicking over to the group of girls. "They think we'll fold, but we won't." And just as they'd promised themselves, they didn't. The next few days were an endless barrage of small cruelties. More whispers, more insults, and more subtle attempts to break them. But the twins kept their heads high. They moved through the halls like warriors, walking as one. They didn't let the cruel words or the stares affect them. They didn't let Ryan or his friends have the satisfaction of seeing them react. But it wasn't just the students who were a problem. Even the teachers, especially Mr. Turner, treated them with cold indifference. They were given the bare minimum. Their answers never met with interest, their presence ignored. It was like they didn't exist, like they were ghosts in a school full of privileged kids who thought they had the right to take up all the space. And then, one afternoon, it happened. Ryan, Zach, and Brent cornered the twins in the hallway after school. This time, there was no crowd to witness. No students waiting with bated breath for the twins to break. It was just them, just Ryan and his gang, ready to finish what they had started. "What's the matter?" Ryan sneered, his face twisted in hatred. "Still pretending like you belong here? You're not fooling anyone." Janelle and Jada stood tall, their bodies tense with the familiar anger, but they didn't let it control them. They knew what was coming. They had prepared for this moment. Without warning, Ryan lunged at Jada, his hands aimed for her shoulders. But Jada was faster. She sidestepped his grasp, using the momentum against him, and shoved him into the lockers with a controlled force that sent a shock through his body. The sound of Ryan's body hitting the metal echoed through the empty hallways. Zach and Brent froze, momentarily stunned. Jada didn't give them a chance to recover. She spun around, keeping her feet grounded, and aimed a quick, sharp jab into Ryan's ribs. He gasped, his eyes wide with shock, but his pride wouldn't let him fall. He swung wildly at her, but she was already moving, already anticipating the next move. She blocked his punch effortlessly and twisted his arm, forcing him to the ground with a skill and precision that left him breathless. Janelle, standing behind her sister, caught sight of Zach trying to make a move. But she was ready. She grabbed his arm, twisted it, and sent him crashing into Brent, both of them tumbling to the floor in a heap. The fight was over in seconds. Ryan, Zach, and Brent lay sprawled out on the floor, gasping for breath, their faces pale with shock and fear. They had underestimated the twins. They had thought they were easy targets, that the girls who walked with their heads held high would eventually break. But they were wrong. Jada and Janelle stood over them, not with triumph, but with quiet satisfaction. They had fought back, and they had won. This time it wasn't just about proving a point. It was about showing the world that no matter how many times they were pushed, no matter how much hatred was thrown their way, they would always stand strong. And the storm? It had only just begun. The following week, everything changed. Jada and Janelle had anticipated the fallout from the fight. They had known that it wouldn't just stop at a few bruises and broken pride for Ryan and his gang. They were prepared for the whispers and the stares that followed them as they walked through the hallways. But what they hadn't prepared for was the school's response. The administrators, who had turned a blind eye to every slur, every shove, every humiliation up until this point, had finally decided to act. But of course, it wasn't to stop the bullying. It was to punish the victims. It started with the principal, Mr. Harrington, calling them into his office. The moment the twins entered the sterile, cold office, they could feel the weight of the situation. It wasn't an invitation to discuss the incident as it should have been. No, they were here to be reprimanded, to be reminded of their place, and they could already feel it in the way Mr. Harrington looked at them, his gaze dismissive, his posture stiff and uncomfortable. He wasn't interested in hearing the whole story. He just wanted to move past it. "I understand there was an altercation in the courtyard," he said, his voice flat. "And while I don't condone violence, I must say I'm concerned about the example this sets for the rest of the student body." Jada's fists clenched at her sides, but she held her tongue. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Janelle's eyes were sharp, scanning the room, but her face was the picture of composure. "Sir," Janelle began, her voice steady but filled with quiet strength. "Ryan and his friends have been bullying us for weeks. We tried to handle it with dignity, but when they pushed us physically, we had no choice but to defend ourselves. Mr. Harrington raised an eyebrow but said nothing. It was clear he wasn't interested in their justification. His focus was on maintaining the status quo, on keeping things neat and orderly in a way that didn't ruffle the feathers of the wealthy parents who funded the school. "Defending yourselves is one thing," Mr. Harrington replied, his voice clipped. "But retaliating in the way you did is another. I can't allow that kind of behavior to go unchecked. The school's reputation is on the line." Jada's patience was wearing thin. She stepped forward, her voice calm but sharp. "The reputation of this school doesn't matter if you let bullying go unpunished. We weren't the ones who started this fight." Mr. Harrington looked at her, his expression unchanged, but there was a brief flicker of something behind his eyes. It wasn't sympathy. It was annoyance. And it was then that Jada understood. To him, they were just an inconvenience. To him, Ryan and his gang were untouchable, the golden children of Rosewood Hills. The twins, on the other hand, were expendable. "Perhaps," Mr. Harrington said, his voice barely audible now, "but we can't allow this kind of thing to escalate further. You two are suspended for 3 days. I hope this serves as a lesson in handling conflicts more maturely in the future." The words hit them like a slap in the face. Suspended. After everything they had endured, after the months of taunting, the countless hours of pushing through microaggressions and outright insults, they were being punished for standing up for themselves. Janelle's breath caught, her eyes narrowing as she fought to keep the fury at bay. "You're punishing us for defending ourselves?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with raw anger. "You'll have time to think about it during your suspension, Mr." Harrington replied coldly, as if it were a simple formality, nothing more than a sentence to be read out like a piece of paper. Jada wanted to say more, to argue, to demand that the school take responsibility for failing them, but she knew there was no point. She knew that the moment they walked out of that office, they would be nothing more than a footnote in the school's attempt to maintain its image. The real story, the one of the bullies who had pushed them too far, would be buried, just like it always was. They would be the ones who were blamed for their own victimization. Without another word, they turned and left the office, walking in silence. They didn't need to speak to each other. The decision had been made. Their suspension was just another chapter in a long history of injustice, one that had been written far before they set foot in Rosewood Hills. As they stepped into the hallway, the weight of their punishment felt heavier than ever. The students in the hallway turned to look at them, their eyes full of judgment, but Jada and Janelle walked on with their heads high, unaffected by the sneers and whispers. This wasn't about them. This was about something much bigger. Later that afternoon, they walked home in silence, the streets quiet beneath the setting sun. Derek Rivers, their father, was waiting for them in the living room when they arrived. His face was calm, but there was an unmistakable glint of concern in his eyes. He didn't need to ask. He had seen the signs. He had known what was coming. "You were suspended," he said, his voice even, but there was a hint of pride beneath the disappointment. He didn't need to say more. They had already shown him everything he needed to know. "We had no choice, Dad," Jada said quietly, sitting down on the couch beside him. "They kept pushing us and we fought back. It was the only thing we could do." Derek nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "I know," he said, his voice low but full of meaning. "I raised you to defend yourselves. But remember, every action has consequences. The fight isn't just physical. It's in how you stand afterward, in how you carry yourself, even when the world tries to knock you down." Janelle leaned forward, her eyes hard with determination. "We're not backing down. Not anymore." Derek smiled, a small but proud smile. "Good, but the battle is far from over. You're going to face more of this." "You always will, but you have something that they don't." "What's that?" Jada asked, a question lingering in the air between them. "You have the truth on your side," Derek said, his voice firm. "And that's something they can never take away from you." Jada and Janelle exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with resolve. They knew that their journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. And no matter what came next, they would face it together, side by side. The next morning, they woke up to a different atmosphere. The air seemed heavier, charged with an energy that neither of them could ignore. The entire school was buzzing with rumors about the fight, and word had spread fast. They had expected backlash, but what they didn't expect was the support that slowly started to trickle in. Some students who had once watched them from a distance, unsure of where they stood, began to approach them. Quiet nods of approval, small, respectful gestures. They weren't fully accepted, not yet, but the tide was shifting. And it was a shift that Ryan and his gang hadn't seen coming. By the time they returned to school after their suspension, things were different. The students who had once whispered behind their backs now whispered to their faces, but not with cruelty. There was a sense of unease in the air, a recognition that something had changed. It wasn't just about the fight anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the consequences. Ryan and his gang watched from the sidelines, their faces twisted with frustration. They had lost, and they didn't know how to react to that. They hadn't just been defeated by fists. They had been defeated by strength, by the unwavering courage of two girls who refused to bow their heads. And that, more than anything, was the true victory. Jada and Janelle walked through the halls with their heads high, their eyes forward. The storm wasn't over. It never would be. But they had learned that fighting back wasn't just about power. It was about standing firm when the world tried to break you. And they weren't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. The tension in Rosewood Hills Academy was palpable. It wasn't the kind of tension that builds in a classroom before a big test or after a long weekend. No, this was something deeper, more rooted, like the storm clouds that gather on the horizon before a downpour. The moment Jada and Janelle stepped foot back into the school after their suspension, the energy around them shifted. Whispers followed them like a cloud of smoke, but this time there was something different in the air, a quiet, almost reluctant respect. The hallways, which had once been filled with subtle sneers and sidelong glances, were now charged with hushed conversations. Students avoided eye contact, pretending to be lost in their own worlds, but Jada and Janelle knew the truth. They had become a topic of conversation, a symbol of defiance, even for those who hadn't been brave enough to speak out. But that wasn't enough. They hadn't come this far to settle for just the whispers. As the twins walked through the hallways, their heads held high, they felt the weight of eyes on them. But instead of shrinking under the pressure, they stood taller. Every glance that fell upon them was a reminder of what they had endured and what they were still willing to face. The fight in the courtyard had been only the beginning, but they had made a statement, and it wasn't one they planned to back down from. Ryan Mallory and his crew, however, had different plans. They hadn't forgotten the embarrassment they'd suffered in the courtyard. It burned in their pride like an open wound, and they were determined to get back at the twins. Ryan, in particular, hadn't been able to shake the image of Jada's cold stare, her unwavering confidence in the face of his humiliation. And so the following days were filled with a quiet, simmering tension. The bullies didn't launch any direct attacks, at least not yet, but every action they took was meant to provoke, to get under the twins' skin. One day, after lunch, Jada and Janelle made their way to their lockers. The hallway was as crowded as ever, but something was off. There was a palpable stillness in the air, a kind of tension that prickled at the back of their necks. As they approached their lockers, they noticed a small crowd gathered nearby, their attention fixed somewhere down the hallway. Janelle's brow furrowed, and she instinctively reached for her sister's arm, her grip tight. Jada gave her a quick glance, her eyes scanning the surroundings with the trained focus their father had instilled in them. She didn't need to ask what was wrong. She could already feel the shift in the air, the subtle warning. "What's going on?" Janelle murmured under her breath. Jada's gaze flicked over the crowd, and there, at the center of it all, stood Ryan, flanked by Zach and Brent. But what caught Jada's attention wasn't just the familiar trio. It was the smug, triumphant looks on their faces. And then she saw it, a small, crumpled piece of paper on the floor, just at the edge of their lockers. A familiar mocking tone laced the words scrawled across it, and her blood ran cold. "You two are nothing but a joke. Keep pretending you belong here." It was a taunt, a threat in the guise of humor, a message meant to humiliate them in front of everyone. Ryan had crossed the line. They had known it was coming. The boys had been playing a waiting game, hoping the twins would show weakness, but they hadn't been prepared for the truth to come to light so quickly. The crowd was watching, waiting for the twins to react, to show a hint of vulnerability. Jada could feel their eyes on her, some with curiosity, others with open hostility, but most with something worse: expectation. The kind of expectation that comes when people have already decided what your response will be. They wanted to see the twins break. They wanted to see them flinch, to cower. But that wasn't going to happen. Jada picked up the paper slowly, holding it in her hand without looking at it. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but unmistakably clear. This ends now. Ryan's smirk faltered for just a moment, his eyes narrowing as he stepped forward, pushing through the crowd of students. "What's the matter, twins?" he sneered, his voice carrying across the hallway. "No response? You were so confident the other day." "What's the matter? You scared now?" Janelle didn't flinch. Instead, she took a step forward, her posture straight and firm. "We don't waste our time on people who aren't worth it." Ryan's expression twisted, his eyes flashing with irritation. He wasn't used to being ignored. He wasn't used to people not giving him the reaction he craved. But it wasn't just that. It was the underlying message, the quiet, powerful refusal to let him control the situation. Ryan didn't know what to do with that. He had expected the twins to shrink, to back down. Instead, they were standing their ground, and it infuriated him. But rather than let the anger simmer, he pushed forward. "You think you're better than everyone here, don't you?" he snapped, his voice rising with the kind of force that came from a desperate need to hold on to power. "You think just because you beat us in that little fight, it means you're untouchable. You think you can just walk in here and act like you belong? Newsflash, you don't." Jada's eyes narrowed, the familiar spark of anger lighting within her chest. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, meeting his gaze head-on, refusing to back down. "We're not here to fit into your world, Ryan. We're here to make our own." And then, before Ryan could respond, the first punch came from Zach. It was a cheap shot, a move meant to catch them off guard, to force them into a corner where they could be humiliated in front of everyone. But Zach hadn't expected what came next. Jada sidestepped with the precision of someone who had been trained to respond, not just react. She ducked under his swing, driving her fist into his stomach with the kind of power that sent him stumbling back. He gasped for air, his face going pale as he tried to regain his balance. Janelle was already there. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed Brent by the collar, using his own momentum against him to slam him into the lockers with a sharp, resounding thud. The sound echoed through the hallway, cutting through the whispers and the gasps from the students watching. Ryan, his face now twisted with rage and embarrassment, lunged at Jada. But this time, it wasn't just about winning. It was about proving a point. Jada blocked his attack effortlessly, twisting his arm behind his back in one smooth motion, forcing him to the ground. The students around them were silent. They had expected chaos, had waited for the twins to break under the pressure. But what they had witnessed instead was the kind of strength they hadn't anticipated. It wasn't about fists and violence. It was about control, discipline, and the quiet power of knowing when to strike. Jada and Janelle stood over them, their breathing steady, their faces calm but resolute. The crowd of students had dispersed, some of them lingering in shock, others moving away in fear. They had just witnessed something they couldn't ignore. And for the first time since they had walked into Rosewood Hills, the twins knew that their fight was no longer just theirs to fight. It was everyone's. Ryan lay on the ground, his body trembling with frustration and pain. But there was no one left to help him. His friends were in no better condition. And as Jada and Janelle turned to walk away, they knew that the balance had shifted. Ryan, Zach, and Brent were no longer the ones in control. The twins had taken their power back, and for the first time, they felt what it was like to stand tall in a place that had once tried to make them feel small. They didn't say anything as they walked down the hall. They didn't need to. Their actions had already spoken louder than words ever could. They were not the victims here. They were the ones who had changed the game, and they had done it on their own terms. As they reached their next class, the whispers began to die down. The school was no longer the same place it had been before. There was an unspoken shift in the air, a recognition that things had changed. The twins had fought back. They had shown everyone that they weren't to be messed with, and that was something no one would forget. The day after the fight in the courtyard, Rosewood Hills Academy felt different. It wasn't the kind of difference that could be easily identified, but the air seemed thicker, charged with something the twins could feel, even if no one dared to say it out loud. The school, which had once felt like a maze of judgment and hidden hostility, now seemed quieter, more aware of the storm that had erupted the day before. Jada and Janelle walked through the hallways, their heads held high, but the weight of the glares and whispers was heavier than it had ever been. It wasn't just the students who had been watching. It was the teachers, too, the ones who had been passive observers before, turning a blind eye to the bullying, to the whispered insults, to the subtle exclusion, now seemed to pay attention, if only for a moment longer. The halls had fallen into an uneasy silence, and for the first time, the twins felt like they weren't just part of the background. They had changed the rules, whether anyone was ready for it or not. But for every action, there was a reaction. The bullies weren't done, not by a long shot. Ryan, Zach, and Brent had tasted defeat, and it didn't sit well with them. For Ryan, the humiliation was personal. Jada's calm, measured response had been a slap to his inflated ego, a reminder that for all his bravado, he was just another arrogant high school bully, nothing more. But he wasn't going to let that go. The next day, he made his move. Jada and Janelle had just entered the lunchroom, their usual routine unbroken, when they felt the shift in the atmosphere. The cafeteria, usually a noisy cacophony of chatter and laughter, had quieted. It was subtle at first, just a brief pause in the conversation as the students turned to look. But then they saw him, Ryan, standing at the far end of the room with his group of friends gathered around him, watching the twins with a look of determination on his face. Jada's eyes narrowed. She could feel it coming, the next round of their little game. It wasn't enough for him to have lost yesterday. No, Ryan wanted to make them suffer, to remind them that they didn't belong here. He wanted to remind everyone that the system, the unspoken rules of this school, were still his to control. She and Janelle walked toward their usual spot, their heads held high, but inside they both knew what was coming. Ryan had a new plan, and it wasn't going to be pretty. As they sat down at their table, the tension in the room escalated. Ryan's voice rang out across the cafeteria, cutting through the low murmurs of conversation. "Hey, look," he sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The girls who think they can just waltz in here and act like they're better than everyone else." His friends snickered, egging him on. The rest of the room fell into a hush, the students eager to watch the next chapter of the drama unfold. Ryan's voice carried, his words laced with venom. "You know, I heard the school's been trying to cover up the whole fight thing. But we all saw it, didn't we? Those girls, pretending to be so tough. What a joke." Zach and Brent laughed along with him, clearly enjoying the attention they were getting. Their taunts were sharp, each one designed to make the twins flinch, to break their composure. But Jada and Janelle didn't flinch. They didn't look at him, didn't react. Their father's lessons echoed in their minds. Control is power. Let them talk. Let them think they've won. Ryan, frustrated by the lack of response, pushed harder. "I don't get it. You two walk around here like you belong, like this place is yours. But let's be real. This school isn't for you. It never was. You're just a couple of charity cases they let in to make them look good." Janelle's fist tightened beneath the table. Jada kept her calm, but she could feel the fire building inside her, the same fire she had fought to control since the first day they walked onto this campus. It wasn't enough to ignore the taunts anymore. She could feel the weight of Ryan's words, the poison dripping from every syllable. This wasn't about who they were, it was about who he wanted them to be. And Jada wasn't about to let him define that for her. But Janelle was quicker to react than Jada anticipated. Without warning, she stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her eyes locked onto Ryan's, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "You think this is a joke?" she said, her voice low but carrying enough force to make the entire room pause. "You think you can keep pushing us, keep humiliating us, and we'll just sit back and take it?" Ryan's smirk faltered for a second, the confidence in his posture cracking under the weight of her words. "What's the matter?" Janelle continued, stepping toward him. "You scared now?" "Because I don't think you're ready for what happens next." The cafeteria was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. No one had ever seen Janelle like this. No one had ever dared to confront Ryan directly before. The air hummed with the promise of something bigger, something that was about to happen. Ryan, sensing his hold slipping, stepped forward, trying to salvage his pride. "You think you can just talk like that, like we're afraid of you?" Ryan sneered, but there was a tremor in his voice now. The bravado was starting to fade. "You're nothing. You and your sister, just a couple of charity cases who think they're something special. You don't belong here." Jada stood, her eyes still locked on Ryan, and in that moment she knew it was time. The game was over. The rules had changed. Before Ryan could take another step, Jada moved with a speed that surprised everyone in the room. She closed the distance between them in a heartbeat, her hand shooting out to grab the collar of his shirt. The cafeteria fell into stunned silence as Jada yanked him toward her, her grip firm, controlled. She didn't say a word, but the message in her eyes was clear. This ends now. Ryan's eyes widened in shock, his pride crumbling in the face of her calm fury. He tried to pull away, but Jada held him steady, her strength undeniable. The crowd around them shifted uneasily, some students glancing at each other, others looking away, unsure how to react to this sudden change. Zach and Brent, seeing their friend on the receiving end of Jada's fury, rushed to his side, but Janelle was already there. She moved with the precision of someone trained, stepping between them and knocking Brent aside with a swift, controlled move. Zach hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, Janelle was already on him. Her arm shot out, grabbing him by the wrist and twisting it with practiced ease, sending him stumbling back. The crowd around them was in shock, but there was something else building in the air. A shift, a feeling of something being upended. Jada and Janelle weren't just standing up for themselves. They were rewriting the rules, and the world was watching. Ryan, now struggling to regain his balance, turned back to Jada, his face twisted with anger and disbelief. "You think you've won," he spat. "You think you can just—" But Jada cut him off, her voice steady and commanding. "We didn't start this," she said, her words clear and firm. "But we're finishing it." With a final sharp push, Jada shoved Ryan backward, sending him crashing into a table. The sound of the crash echoed through the cafeteria, and the room fell into a stunned silence. Ryan scrambled to his feet, but the damage had been done. His confidence, his control had evaporated. Jada and Janelle had turned the tables, and now everyone could see it. The twins didn't wait for the applause or the reactions. They turned and walked away, their heads held high, their steps unbroken. The battle had shifted in their favor, and they knew this was only the beginning. But as they left the cafeteria, the weight of what had just happened settled over them. They had made their stand, and they had proven something to everyone watching. They were not to be messed with. And no one, not even Ryan Mallory, would ever forget that. The air in the school had shifted since the confrontation in the cafeteria. The entire campus felt charged, like the calm before a storm. Jada and Janelle had earned their moment of respect, But Ryan and his friends weren't the types to let defeat settle in their hearts. No, they would find a way to make this personal, to try again, and the twins knew it. They weren't under any illusions that this fight was over. It had only just begun. The next day, the twins arrived at school early. It was their usual routine: walk into the building, move through the halls with their heads high, and ignore the whispers and stares. But today, there was a strange heaviness in the air. The usual gaggle of students who normally filled the hallway with the sound of gossip and chatter were strangely quiet, almost too aware of the tension that hung in the air like an electric charge. As they walked past the lockers, they felt the eyes on them. Some faces turned away quickly, embarrassed at being caught staring. Others remained fixed, not with judgment this time, but with the kind of quiet respect that came from witnessing something unexpected, something real. But for every student who gave them the silent nod of acknowledgement, there was someone else waiting in the shadows, watching for the next misstep. Jada kept her focus forward, determined to not let their stares get to her. She had seen the way the school's dynamics shifted after the cafeteria showdown. There were those who wanted to rise to the occasion, to change, to be better. And then there were those like Ryan Mallory, who would never let things go until they had reasserted their dominance. The day passed like a slow-burning fuse. Every time the twins walked through a hallway, the whispers picked up. Every time they stepped into a classroom, the air grew thick. They could feel the eyes on them, some curious, others uncomfortable, and some with that unmistakable glint of challenge, the kind that comes when someone feels threatened by your strength. And then it happened. The thing that they had been waiting for. It started in the middle of gym class. Jada was practicing her form, moving through a series of precise strikes and defensive blocks. She had always loved the rhythm of martial arts, the controlled power in every move, the fluidity of her body as it responded to every command. It was more than just a physical practice, it was mental too. She had learned to control every emotion, every twitch of her body, every word that threatened to slip from her lips. Martial arts had given her the ability to stay calm in the storm. But today, Ryan wasn't just going to watch from the sidelines. He was going to make sure everyone knew who was still in charge, who still held the power. As Jada sparred with a partner, her movements sharp and fluid, she felt the presence of Ryan, looming at the edge of the gym. Ryan stood near the bleachers, surrounded by his usual gang of friends. They were laughing, mocking, like they always did. But this time there was something different in Ryan's posture. His eyes were trained on Jada, his gaze sharp, like a predator watching its prey. He had something planned. He always did. Without warning, Ryan strode into the center of the gym, cutting across the floor with the same swagger he always had. But today, his steps felt heavier. Today, there was something more menacing in his movement. The students nearby turned their heads, some whispering, others watching, but no one dared to speak up. Jada felt a knot form in her stomach, but she didn't break her stride. She wasn't afraid. She wouldn't show him that fear. She wasn't about to let him think for 1 second that he could shake her confidence. Ryan's voice echoed across the gym as he called out, "Hey, look at the twins, thinking they can come in here and act like they own this place." His words were laced with that same familiar venom, but now they were wrapped in a false sense of bravado. He wasn't just trying to insult them anymore. He was trying to break them. And there was something desperate in his eyes now, a flicker of fear that Jada caught, but only for a second before he covered it with a smirk. "Maybe you should teach us some moves," Ryan continued, his voice louder now, meant to draw attention. "You know, show us how to be tough." The students around them tensed, the air thickening with anticipation. This wasn't just a verbal attack. This was a challenge. Ryan was daring them to fight him back. He was daring them to prove themselves again. And this time, he was ready to push them further. But Jada and Janelle were ready. They had been trained for moments like this. They had been prepared for every attempt to break them, to provoke them, to drag them into a fight they didn't want, and they weren't going to fall for it. "I don't need to show you anything, Ryan," Jada replied, her voice calm but carrying a quiet authority that made the crowd pause. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She just spoke the truth. "What you don't get is that this isn't about who's tougher. It's about respect, something you're too blind to understand." The gym went quiet, every eye now on the twins. Ryan's smirk faltered, just for a moment, before he tried to recover. "Respect?" he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "Respect. You think you deserve respect after what you did?" Jada's eyes locked onto his, unwavering. "You didn't deserve it before, Ryan, and you sure as hell don't deserve it now." Ryan's eyes narrowed, his hands balling into fists. He wasn't going to back down. He wasn't used to being challenged like this. He was used to people cowering, apologizing, begging for his forgiveness. But Jada and Janelle weren't like everyone else. In that moment, something shifted. Ryan lunged at Jada, his hands reaching out, trying to grab her and knock her off balance. But she was faster, quicker than he had anticipated. She sidestepped his lunge with ease, her body moving fluidly like water, and before he could react, she delivered a sharp blow to his midsection, forcing the wind from his lungs and sending him stumbling backward. The crowd gasped, the tension in the air reaching its peak. Ryan wasn't the only one stunned. So was everyone else. They had never seen anyone stand up to him like that. No one had ever been able to do it before. But Jada wasn't just standing up to him. She was showing him, showing all of them, what it really meant to be strong. Ryan clutched his stomach, gasping for breath, his confidence shattered. He staggered back, glaring at Jada with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You'll regret that," he snarled, but Jada didn't flinch. She didn't even look at him. "I already did," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The crowd stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Ryan had been knocked off his pedestal, and they didn't know how to respond. The game had changed, and they could feel it. Janelle, standing beside her sister, finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. "You wanted a fight, Ryan," she said. "But you just learned the hard way that we don't fight for fun. We fight to survive." With that, Jada and Janelle turned and walked away, their heads held high, their backs straight. They didn't need to say another word. Their actions had spoken louder than anything they could have said. The bullies had been given their warning. And now it was their turn to face the consequences. The twins had made their stand, and this time, no one was going to forget it. The days after the gym showdown were nothing short of chaotic. Word of the twins' fight had spread like wildfire across Rosewood Hills Academy. Some students saw them as heroes, others as troublemakers, but everyone was watching. Everyone knew that the status quo had been shattered. The reign of Ryan and his gang of bullies had come to a grinding halt, but not without consequences. Consequences that no one expected. The school administration, of course, couldn't ignore the physical altercation. They had to do something. The letter of the law required that they punish those involved, but as Derek Rivers had expected, the real issue was not the fight. It was the reason behind it. The harassment, the constant verbal abuse, the whispers, the shoves, everything that had been allowed to go unchecked for so long was now coming to light. The school had turned a blind eye for far too long. The principal, Mr. Harrington, had summoned Derek and the twins to his office that morning. Jada and Janelle arrived with their heads held high, their backs straight, and their faces calm. They were not afraid. They had made it clear to Ryan, to the whole school, that they would not be bullied. But now, in the stark, cold office of the headmaster, the pressure of what they had done began to settle in. They had not just stood up to a bully, they had upended the very system that had allowed the bullying to thrive. As they walked into the office, they were met with a stern gaze from Mr. Harrington. His hands were folded neatly on his desk, and the air between them felt thick with unspoken tension. The twins exchanged a glance. They had faced far worse than this. But still, they knew the stakes had never been higher. They could feel the weight of every decision, every word being measured against them. "We need to talk about what happened yesterday, Mr. Harrington began, his voice calm but carrying a certain edge. "The altercation in the gym, that's not something we take lightly." Derek spoke up immediately, his tone firm but controlled. "My daughters defended themselves. They were harassed for weeks, and yesterday they stood up for themselves. What do you want from them? To let it continue? To sit by while they're picked on? You know better than that." Mr. Harrington's eyes flicked to the twins. "I understand that, but the fact remains that physical violence cannot be tolerated. We need to look at all sides of this." Jada's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "What about the harassment, the bullying that went on for weeks? What about that?" Nobody did anything. No teacher spoke up. No one stepped in. But the moment we fought back, suddenly it's an issue. You want us to keep taking it? To keep looking the other way? The words stung, but they were true. Janelle's eyes were cold, her posture unbroken, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a quiet fury that had been building for weeks. She wasn't going to let this moment slip by without a fight. "I know this isn't easy, Mr. Harrington said, his voice shifting slightly. "But we have rules for a reason. We can't just let things escalate without consequences." Derek looked directly at the principal. "Escalate? You think this was escalation? They didn't start this." "They were forced into it. And now you want to punish them for defending themselves?" The tension in the room was palpable. "Mr. Harrington shifted in his seat, but before he could respond, the door to his office opened. A teacher, Mrs. Patterson, walked in, her face flushed with what looked like guilt. She had been one of the teachers who had witnessed the entire thing in the gym. She looked at the twins, and then at Mr. Harrington, her expression a mix of hesitation and quiet resolution. I need to say something," she said, her voice steady but unsure. "I was in the gym when it happened. I saw everything. I didn't step in when I should have, and I'm sorry for that. But I don't think they're the ones who should be punished. Ryan Mallory and his friends, what they've been doing to these girls, it's been going on for far too long. They're the ones who should be held accountable." There was a moment of stunned silence. Mrs. Patterson was a respected teacher at Rosewood Hills, known for her quiet authority and her dedication to her students. For her to speak out like this was rare, and it sent a clear message that things were not as they seemed. Mr. Harrington's face tightened. "You're suggesting we ignore the fight and focus on the bullying?" "I'm suggesting that we do what's right," Mrs. Patterson replied, her voice firm. "We have a responsibility to stop the cycle of abuse, and we've let it go on for too long." Jada and Janelle exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding. For the first time in weeks, it felt like the world might be tipping in their favor. They had not fought this battle alone, and it was clear now that things were starting to change. Mr. Harrington stood up, clearly frustrated but unwilling to argue further. "I'll review this with the board," he said, his voice stiff. "But don't expect this to be over quickly." Derek stood beside his daughters, unwavering. "Take your time," he said calmly, "but don't forget, this fight, it's just beginning." As they left the office, Jada and Janelle felt a strange sense of victory, but it wasn't the kind that came with a win in the traditional sense. It was the kind of victory that came from standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. They had made their point. They had shown the world that they would not be pushed around anymore. And the fight was far from over. They knew it, but they were ready. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and quiet conversations between teachers, students, and administrators. The school board had reviewed the footage from the gym and the testimonies from students and teachers alike. Ryan Mallory and his friends, Zach and Brent, were brought in for questioning. The truth could no longer be hidden. It wasn't long before the school made its decision. Ryan Mallory was expelled. Zach and Brent, too, faced the same fate. The board had decided that the actions of the bullies were far beyond what could be ignored. The harassment, the cruel jokes, the physical intimidation, they had crossed the line. And for the first time, it felt like the scales of justice were tipping in the right direction. Jada and Janelle sat in the courtyard the day the announcement was made. The air felt different now. Not just lighter, but freer. It was as if the weight they had been carrying for so long had finally been lifted. "Can you believe it?" Janelle said, her voice quiet but full of satisfaction. "I can't believe it took this long," Jada replied, her gaze steady as she looked across the yard. "But it feels good, doesn't it?" Janelle nodded. "It does. We've made them listen." "Not just listen," Jada said, her voice low and resolute. "We've made them change." They sat together side by side, watching as the students passed by. Some whispered. Others stared, but no one dared to laugh. No one dared to push them. "Not anymore." Janelle stood up, her eyes bright with something fierce and unyielding. "We're not done yet, Jada." "There's still work to do." Jada smiled, standing up beside her. "I know, but we'll do it together." Always. And with that, they walked across the courtyard, heads held high, their backs straight, and the world finally beginning to feel like a place they could shape with their own hands. The final bell rang, signaling the end of the day. Students filed out of classrooms and into the hallways. Jada and Janelle walked side by side, a quiet strength between them that no one could ignore. They had fought for their place in this world, and they had earned it. The storm had passed, but the sun was shining brighter than ever. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. This story is far from the only one worth telling. Stay tuned for more stories of resilience, courage, and fighting back against the odds. We've only just begun.